Hello, I'm Mark Arnold and I'm the Additional Needs Ministry Director at Urban Saints, a national children's and youth organisation. And this talk is all about supporting families of children with additional support needs or SEND. I'm dad to James, and James is autistic, has learning difficulties, epilepsy, and anxiety issues. So, this is a journey that I've been on as a dad, as well as a professional working in this field. In this session, we're going to be exploring where this journey all begins, pre diagnosis. And then we'll look at the diagnosis itself and all that that brings. We'll look at the cycle of grief that many parents and carers can find themselves going through. We'll look at the transitions and milestones and rites of passage that children go through as they grow and develop through youth and adolescence, and what some of those transitions and milestones and rites of passage can mean for families of children with additional support needs or SEND. We'll explore ways in which we can support families practically and pastorally on that journey. And we'll finish with signposting towards some more information and resources that you can use after this talk. Alongside this talk, there's a workbook, which I hope you've all been able to access. And this provides more detail on top of everything that's included in this talk. I hope you enjoy it. Now, the journey for many parents of children with additional support needs or SEND can start right at the earliest stages of life. It maybe even before a baby is born or around the time of birth, but it can also be months or years after that. And during that pre-diagnosis phase, there can be all sorts of worries that parents can experience. They start perhaps to detect that something might be wrong, but they're worried that they might be being paranoid. Is there something wrong? Is it serious? How do we find out as parents? Who do we ask? And do we want to find out? Sometimes we're perhaps secretly avoiding asking for that intervention and help because we're frightened about what the outcome might be. But eventually, maybe because somebody sits us down and explains to us what's happening anyway, or maybe because we reach out and get that help and support that we and our child needs, we start to find out what's happening. It can sometimes take a long time, and some of us never get all the answers that we're seeking. Often it can be a bit of a postcode lottery. In our case, James was diagnosed as autistic and with learning difficulties when he was 2. But in the work that I do, I meet many parents who have teenagers that they've been trying to get a diagnosis for years and years and still haven't reached that point. But it can be a worrying and a troubling and a stressful time for parents, and a time when some support and being able to talk things through can really make a difference and help parents on that journey, even if it's signposting towards places where perhaps some input can be provided, maybe some parent support group or carer support group that can help a parent or carer to go on that journey and find out what's happening for their child. When we reach that point where perhaps a diagnosis arrives, and as I said, that could be very early in the life of a child, but it could be at any stage as that child is growing up. What does that mean? What does that mean for us as a family? What does it mean for us as parents? Suddenly our entire world changes. We don't understand. We've not been in that world before. We have so many questions, so many uncertainties, so many things that we need help and support with. How did this happen? Was it our fault? Was it something we did that created that additional support need or special educational need or disability for our child? We can blame ourselves, and that's a really tough place for parents to be in. why did it happen? Why did it happen to us? And we'll ask all those questions about, why it's our family that this has happened to, our child. Why were we in that 1% that has a child with that particular additional support need? And suddenly we're faced with the loss of all the hopes and dreams that we had for our child. Life is now going to be very different. When my son James was born, I looked at him at that first day. All kinds of totally unrealistic dreams were in my mind about him striding out to open the batting for England in an Ashes Test match, or being part of a mission to Mars, or all kinds of things that statistically incredibly unlikely to happen. And that will be the case for all parents. But what happens over the lifetime of our child is that those dreams, those ambitions, those goals we have for our child slowly change as our child takes up different interests and perhaps heads in different directions. But when we receive a diagnosis about our child, those dreams are shattered instantly, and it can be hard. And it can devastate parents and create a real sense of grief and spiral us off into those 5 stages of grief that perhaps you've heard of, but which we'll just pray see again here now, in case this is something new to you. Because it might help to explain how parents respond to a diagnosis, but maybe also why parents can sometimes find themselves going around and around and getting stuck in that cycle of grief as well, and therefore their reaction and response to some of the things you might be sharing with them can reflect that. The first of the stages of grief is denial. Just pretending it's not real, it's not happening to us. It's an overwhelming emotion where it's a fight and flight response. We're unable to control what's happening, but we just want it to go away, and we just want to pretend that it's not there. And many parents can find themselves stuck in that place of denial. It's isolating, it's hard, it's a difficult place for parents to find themselves. If they move on from that place of denial, then usually the next stage of grief that they experience is anger. The reality and the enormity, perhaps, of that diagnosis is starting to break through, and they're trying to find ways of responding to that, and struggling to do that, and it can result in them lashing out at people that are trying to help them. That could be verbally, sometimes sadly even physically. It can be terribly destructive, and it can create all kinds of relationship difficulties and challenges. Well over half of families with a disabled child have major significant relationship difficulties and breakdowns. It's a really tough time for families to be journeying through. If they move on from that place of anger, the next stage on the cycle of grief is bargaining. Maybe they're trying to rationalise it, trying to regain some control of the situation that we find ourselves in, and the vulnerability that perhaps we feel. And if we do this, maybe that could happen. If we do something different, maybe there'll be a better outcome. Sometimes those bargaining strategies can be completely unrealistic, but that bargaining can perhaps provide a tiny bit of maybe false hope, but hope that takes parents out of that anger and gives them something to hold on to, a bit of a life raft in the storm that they find themselves in. But often then that moves on to the 4th stage of the cycle of grief, which is depression. A sadness and a regret and a realisation that perhaps the bargaining is not going to come off. Those dreams are lost, those ambitions for our child are lost, and as a consequence of that, just a real low point where families can realise this isn't going to go away. This is the new normal, for them as a family, and they've not found the positives in it yet. All they can see is the loss and the hardness and the difficulty and the challenge, both for their child and for them. And again, that's a hard place for families to be in. And again, linking families into support networks, connecting them with other parents that perhaps are on that journey themselves and maybe are a little bit further down that road, can make a huge difference. Just 6 months after James received his diagnosis, I remember us being at a Child Development Centre for an appointment with James, and another parent was brought into the parents' room where we were, and she just received the diagnosis for her child and was in a terrible state. And we were able to just talk with her a little bit and to let her know that 6 months on from our diagnosis day, things were looking a little more optimistic for us. We'd been able to find some positives, some reasons to dance in the rain and to think of positive ways in which we could move forward as a family. And that perhaps was the beginning for us of the 5th stage of the cycle of grief, which is acceptance. And acceptance isn't a gift that is obtained by every family. Not everybody gets there. Often people are stuck in one of those earlier stages, and those that make it to acceptance will start to think about things more positively. We'll be looking for the ways forward as a family. How can we create a new normal for us that's more positive and affirming and celebrates all the things that our child can do and that we can do as a family, making the best of things. It's not about being brave, it's not about being inspirational, it's about making the best of the opportunities that we've now got to make a better life for us and our child. Things are going to be different to what they might have been, but they don't necessarily have to be as dark and as difficult as perhaps we first thought. Now, that cycle of grief isn't something that families go through just once, and if they make it to acceptance, then that's it. As we'll explore in this talk, there are times when we can be pitched back into it again. There are times when we can find ourselves back at denial and anger and bargaining and depression as things trigger for us those feelings of loss once more. We'll explore some of that a little later in this talk. There are a couple of great stories that help to explain the journey that parents can go through and that can help us to get a better idea of perhaps how parents respond to the journey that they're on, and maybe how we can help and support them on that journey too. We're going to explore those. One is called Welcome to Holland. The other is all about a chocolate orange. The first of the stories that helps to explain the journey that families can go on is called Welcome to Holland. It's written by Emily Pearl Kingsley. And what Emily tells us in this story is a great way of understanding how parents go on that journey of receiving the news that their child has special educational needs or a disability. She says, "I'm often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. Well, it's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and make your wonderful plans. The Colosseum, Michelangelo, David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all really exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands. The cabin crew come in and say, 'Welcome to Holland.' 'Holland,' you say? 'What do you mean, Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy all my life. I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. Now, the important thing is that they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy some new guidebooks, and you must learn a new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people that you would have never otherwise have met. It's just a different place. It's perhaps slower paced than Italy at times, less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while, and you've caught your breath, and you've looked around, then you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, and Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they've had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never, ever, ever fully go away. Because the loss of that dream is a very, very significant loss. But if we, as parents, spend our lives mourning the fact that we didn't get to go to Italy, we may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland. The second story that helps us to understand more about what parents experience when they find that their child has additional support needs or special educational needs or disability is taken from the book The Life You Never Expected by Andrew and Rachel Wilson, and it's called The Orange. Finding out your children have special needs is kind of like being given an orange. You're sitting with a group of friends in a restaurant. You've just finished a decent main course and are about to consider the dessert menu, when one of your friends gets up, taps their glass with a spoon and announces that they've brought desserts for everyone as a gift. They disappear for a moment and return with armfuls of round objects about the size of a tennis ball, all beautifully wrapped, each with a bow. As they begin distributing the mysterious desserts, everyone starts to open them in excitement, and one by one the group discover that they've been given a chocolate orange. 20 segments of rich, smooth, lightly flavoured milk chocolate, a perfect conclusion to a fine meal, and a very sociable way of topping off an enjoyable evening. The table is filled with chatter, expressions of gratitude between mouthfuls, and that odd mixture of squelching sound and intermittent silence that you always get when a large group is filling their faces. Then you open your present. You've been given an orange. Not a chocolate orange, an actual orange. 11 segments of erratically sized, pith-covered segments with surprisingly large pips in annoying places, requiring a degree in engineering in order to peel it properly. The consumption of which inevitably involves having juice down to at least your wrists, being squirted in your eye with painful acid, and spending the remainder of the meal picking strands the size of iron filings out from between your teeth. You stare at the orange in front of you with a mixture of surprise, maybe disappointment, maybe confusion. The rest of the table hasn't noticed. They're too busy enjoying their chocolate oranges. You pause to reflect. There's nothing wrong with oranges, you say to yourself. They're sharp and sweet and refreshing and zesty. The undisputed kings of the citrus world. When did you last order a freshly squeezed lemon juice? Oranges are enliveningly flavoursome, filled with vitamin C and far better for you than greedily consuming the mixture of sugar and milk powder and cocoa butter and milk fat that the rest of your friends are consuming. With a bit of patience, they can probably be peeled without blinding your neighbours. Looking at it from a number of perspectives, in fact, medically, dietary, environmentally, you've actually been given a better dessert than anyone else. And you didn't have a right to be given anything anyway. But your heart sinks all the same. And orange was not what you expected. As soon as you saw everyone else opening their chocolate, you simply assumed that what you would get too would be the same. Not only that, not only was it not what you wanted, but you could pretend that it was and do your best to appreciate it and be thankful. But you really had your heart set on those rich, smooth, lightly flavoured chocolate segments. And because you're surrounded by other people, you have to come to terms with the sheer unfairness of being given your orange, while your friends enjoy, share, laugh and celebrate about theirs. A nice meal has taken an unexpected turn, and suddenly you feel isolated, disappointed, frustrated, and even alone. Discovering your children have special needs is a bit like that. You can read the rest of the story in the book, The Life You Never Expected, as Rachel and Andrew conclude their story about the orange by saying that the feelings that they had, the disappointments that they had, in their case, those feelings became less acute, less frequent over time. Their appreciation of the wonders of tangy citrus and vitamin C have increased as they've got to know their child and all the things that their child has brought to their family. And as a consequence, their longing for the chocolate orange child has diminished. But in their case, it hasn't entirely disappeared, and they're not sure that it ever will. There will still be times, there will still be triggers that might create those feelings in them again. And they've accepted that that's okay. They've reached that point of acceptance in that cycle of grief. We're going to look next at some of the triggers, some of the circumstances that can sometimes tip us back into that cycle of grief again. There are all kinds of transitions, milestones, rites of passage that a child and young person journeys through throughout their childhood and adolescence. Some of those can be age-related, some of them can be faith-related, some of them sit in the secular world, some of them can be to do with school. There are many different kinds of transitions and milestones and rites of passage. Transitions might involve starting at preschool, moving from preschool into primary school, that first day at big school, moving up through the different classes and transitioning from one to the next. Then, of course, there's perhaps changing school, going up to secondary education, and all that brings. Maybe a transition from a small primary school to a big comprehensive, and that can be quite a challenge. Maybe for some children and young people, that can then extend on into going into college or into university or into an apprenticeship or into work. And maybe in their lives outside of education and employment, it can involve being part of a children's group and maybe transitioning from that into a youth group setting, that kind of thing. Milestones can be all of those tick points for a child's development that they can go through right from early years through into adolescence and adulthood. Learning to crawl, learning to stand, learning to walk, developing speech and communication, being able to ride a scooter or a bike, going through puberty and all the changes that that can bring, gaining some level of independence and being able to, for example, walk to school or cycle to school on their own. Exams and assessments that will happen throughout their life. And then there are all kinds of rites of passage that culturally can play a part. There might be religious rites of passage that can occur during the life of a child or young person. Within the school setting, there are rites of passage like the school prom, the school disco, first boy and girlfriends, 18th, 21st birthdays. their first holiday with friends without their parents. Maybe if they do go on to college or university, then some form of graduation. A whole bunch of different rites of passage that children and young people go through as they develop. And each of those, for parents, for families of children with additional support needs or special educational needs and disabilities, can perhaps be trigger moments for them, as things perhaps either are much slower in happening or don't happen at all. And those trigger moments can throw us back into that cycle of grief that we talked about earlier, those feelings that are so negative and that can result in the way that we then respond to others being more challenging. And they can catch out any one of us. I know just a few months ago, last summer, James was 18. And that August, he would, in another world and on another journey, have received his A-level results and perhaps have been thinking of heading off to university, following in the footsteps of his older sister. But for James, that was never going to be the reality. And so when on the news there were pictures of A-level students opening up their results and jumping in the air with joy and celebration, some of them perhaps being upset because the results hadn't been what they'd hoped for. But in that moment, again, there was just a tinge of sadness for me. Because although James has a happy and fulfilled life in many ways, maybe there was still a part of me that just felt, wow, that could have been him. That could have been his journey. And just once more briefly, I was heading off into that cycle of grief again. And so when those transitions, those milestones, those rites of passage are happening, it's really important that we think about how we can support families through them and preparing them as much as we can in advance for any transitions are really going to be helpful. So whether it's starting at school, whether it's moving up from one class to the next, maybe it's changes in the staff that are going to be looking after and caring and supporting and helping with the education for their child. Maybe it's helping them to prepare for some of those other milestones like puberty, so that there are resources that we can equip them with to help them understand the changes that are coming for their child and to help them to be able to then support their child with us as professionals through those transitions, milestones and rites of passage. But understanding them, mapping them out for a child as much as we're able to, and being ready to provide the support that families need through those times can really help for those perhaps challenging periods to be a little easier and for families to feel more supported, more able to cope, more able to help their child to cope through those more difficult experiences. As we continue to think about ways to support families of children with additional support needs or SEND, it's important that we think about ways that we can connect families with families like them and other forms of support locally that can help them on their journey. In most areas, there are parent-carer support groups that are established to link families together and to link them with other professionals that are working in this field too, to provide information and support and encouragement to families that are on this journey. So look out for those support groups and find ways to introduce the families that you're journeying with to those groups so that they can be helped and supported as they go on their journey, and perhaps in time can provide support and encouragement and help to other families that are coming along on that journey behind them. Within our settings, there will already be ways in which we're providing support. We might already have some dedicated support for the child or young person from that family, maybe some TA support or one-to-one support within our school environment. And that person can be a critical link between the family and home. It can be a person who forms a bond, a relationship with the family that helps us to be able to understand more about some of the stresses and challenges that they're going through. They can be a terrific link person for when we're looking to help and resource families whose child is perhaps going through one of those transitions or milestones or rites of passage. If we know that their child is going to be moving school, then again there's a link between the support role within the current school environment and perhaps the support role in the school that they're going to be going to, and a handing over well of all the information that the new support person will need about that child and the family that they're a part of. Many families, especially over this difficult period that we've been in, have lost respite provision that has been previously provided for them. And so thinking about ways that we could perhaps support and help families, maybe by providing support through after school clubs, so that there are ways for children with additional support needs or SEND to be supported, and allowing parents a bit of time to be able to just deal with all the things that they need to, knowing that their child is safe and is having fun and is having some developmental opportunities and some learning opportunities in an after-school club of some kind. Think about maybe if you've got several families with children with additional support needs or special educational needs and disabilities, to hold some kind of monthly or 2 monthly drop-in place where they can come together, perhaps over a coffee, and just an opportunity for them to share their journey, and perhaps have support staff from the school that are there to be able to help them and just engage with them and encourage them during those times as well. Obviously at the moment that's difficult with everything being so challenging and with lockdown, but when things do open up more, offering that kind of support to parents can be really helpful and can make a big difference. There are support groups that can help with everyday tasks like shopping or collecting prescriptions, or routine tasks that are needed to support families around the house. Again, that might be through the same support network of parents and carers that I mentioned earlier, but there may be other opportunities to look for ways to offer families links to support groups that they can be a part of. Again, explore whether there are local support groups for you that you can introduce families to. Often families with a child with SEND can be struggling financially as well. Sometimes disability and poverty are close friends, unfortunately. Perhaps because a parent or carer has to reduce their hours or stop work as a consequence of their caring responsibilities for the child or young person that they are supporting. There's a very close link between disability and poverty shown by the recent study of the Joseph Rowntree Trust, who established that of all the households that are considered to be on or below the poverty line, half of them include somebody with a disability. That could be an adult member of that household, or it could be a child. But it shows that there are strong links between poverty and disability. And so we might have families who are struggling financially even more than most are in these difficult times. Connecting families to places of support that can help them, such as Christians Against Poverty, for example, who are set up to be able to help families through difficult times and to be able to provide them with advice advice and support to help them in those times. The Citizens Advice Bureau could be another source of support that we could signpost families towards. Often one of the struggles that families face is when they need to go to a meeting, perhaps a health care meeting or a social services meeting, or indeed a school meeting to do with their child. And so again, looking to see if there are ways that we can establish a network of supporters that can go with them and be there for them to help them to be able to get the most out of those meetings and to not feel so intimidated by what can sometimes be a really challenging and difficult time. So again, thinking about what that looks like in our own settings. Are there ways that we can provide support and advocacy for families when they are a part of those meetings, which might be quite hard for them? In all of this, there are family members that can often be overlooked or who we don't see so much of. Siblings can be a key area here. Often the siblings of children with special educational needs or disabilities can inadvertently be overlooked. All the focus is on their brother or sister, the child who has additional support needs or SEND, and the siblings are often just left to cope and to get on with things. But for the sibling of a child or young person with additional support needs, life can be very different. There can be all sorts of challenges that siblings face. Often the things that might be taken for granted by their peers, being able to go on holiday, being able to go out as a family to the movies or for a meal, all kinds of things that families can just at the spur of the moment sometimes do, aren't possible always for the families of children with additional support needs or SEND. And siblings can sometimes experience that hardship, that loss of the things that their friends are easily and readily able to do. Often siblings can end up being young carers as well, pitching in to help and support the family to be able to look after and help their brother or sister who has additional support needs. And the extra responsibility that can sometimes bring can create a difference in the maturity of that brother or sister. All of these are factors that we should consider and take into account when we're thinking about how to support those siblings that we are aware of. Sometimes it's just helpful to have somebody that can pastorally be there to listen to those siblings as they just share a little about perhaps the hard things that they experience as part of their life. It's not always possible for a parent to be the right person to listen to all that sibling might be sharing. It might be that they're reluctant to talk to mum and dad about that, but having somebody that they can just share those things with, perhaps even in a school setting, can really make a difference. And to know that there's somebody that's heard them and perhaps can give them some tips and advice, maybe even linking them in with sibling support networks like SIBS, who are there to provide that very service and to be able to help the siblings of children and young people with SEND or additional support needs, and to link them together, to give them opportunities to share that journey with each other. Another group that we perhaps have less contact with can be dads. As a dad myself and as a professional working in this area, I know that 90 to 95% of the family members that I engage with tend to be mums. And I occasionally see dads, but that's quite rare. I've set up a dad support network called the Dad's Fire Circle with the aim of trying to gather dads of children with additional support needs and disabilities together so that we can share our journey and encourage each other, because dads don't tend to be the ones that come to the meetings, that come to the training, that get the support. It generally, not entirely, but generally tends to be mums who fulfill that role. All kinds of reasons why that that can be. But again, thinking of dads, thinking of how we can signpost dads towards support networks like the Dads Fire Circle, Dads Take 5 and Chat, or Who Let the Dads Out, all of which are great support networks that can encourage dads and link dads together so that they can share their stories and be able to journey together and to be able to just help each other through what can be challenging experiences for dads. Obviously, there are unique challenges that lockdown has brought for families of children with additional support needs or SEND, and it's important that we bear all that in mind as well. We recently, through a group that I helped to found and manage called the Additional Needs Alliance, asked parents for their views of lockdown and for what their experience of lockdown had been. And a lot of that went into a broader report that the Disabled Children's Partnership produced, all of which showed that families are really struggling at this time. It showed that not only are the support services that families have been relying on closed or reduced dramatically during this time, but the physical and mental health of parents, carers, siblings, and indeed children with additional support needs and SEND themselves are really struggling during this time. It's a stark picture and one that is well worth exploring further. In the workbooks that I've provided with this talk, you'll find more information about the work that the Disabled Children's Partnership has done, the results of that, and what came out of their study, and it's well worth a read because it will give you an insight into what life is like for parents, carers, family members of children and young people with SEND at this time. There are lots of other ways that we can practically and pastorally support families of children with special educational needs and disabilities. A lot of it is around listening, around being prepared to hear from them the struggles and challenges that they are journeying with, and to have a toolkit of resources available for us to then be able to provide support, or at least to be able to signpost them towards places where support is available. One of the best ways, though, that we can really make a difference for families is to every now and then think of a way in which we could give them a treat. So often for families of children with additional support needs or SEND, life can be really hard and they don't get to have much of an opportunity to think about treats, and indeed most of the time that they're engaging, especially with professionals, it's all very serious and often quite difficult and challenging. So occasionally, for something to turn up unexpectedly that's a treat for them, maybe a voucher for them to be able to go and get themselves a coffee somewhere, maybe some chocolates arriving, maybe a bunch of flowers, whatever that might look like for them and for you. Think about ways that as a school, as professionals, we can be there to provide just a little something that brightens their day that day, that helps them to be in a better place and helps them to know that we care and are there to support them and help them. Think about what that might look like and what treats might mean for the families that you're journeying with. As we bring this session towards a conclusion, I just wanted to spend a few moments signposting you towards information and resources that can help you to help the families that you're journeying with. Have a look at the Urban Saints website, urbansaints.org/additional needs. There's loads of articles and video and resources there that can help you and that can help the families that you're journeying with. You might like to introduce families to the Additional Needs Alliance. There's a Facebook group. If they search for Additional Needs Alliance in Facebook, they'll find us. And there are over 2,500 children's and youth and families workers, parents and other family members, practitioners, including teachers, who are part of that community. And it would be a great place to introduce your families to. Maybe you'd like to join it yourself. There's also in your workbook links to loads of other resources and web pages that can be helpful for you and the families that you're journeying with. Whether that's Care for the Family, that provide a befriender service for families of children with additional support needs and disabilities, to link them together with folk locally that can journey with them and support them. There's the Carers Trust that provides support for young carers, siblings of children and young people with special educational needs and disability. Christians Against Poverty that I mentioned earlier, that are there to support families that are going through financial hardship, as do the Citizens Advice Bureau. SIBS, again, a great organisation that are there to journey with and link together the siblings of children with special educational needs and disabilities. Take 5 and Chat, that connect with drop-in centres across the UK that are there to support families with children with additional support needs. The Dad's Fire Circle that I spoke about earlier, that connects dads together and gives us a place to be able to share our stories and journey together. And then there's the Trussell Trust that provides food banks across the country, supporting families that are really struggling, especially at this time, and particularly families where disability and poverty are closely linked and are resulting in families that are already struggling even further. I hope you've really found this talk helpful and the workbook that goes with it. I want to give a final word to a mum who filled in some information we requested through the Additional Needs Alliance about lockdown and the current situation a while ago, and we asked what their experiences of lockdown were. This mum shares more eloquently than I could what life had been like for her. Thinking about this from a church point of view, because that's the area I chiefly work in, but this could just as easily be applied to schools as well. She says, "Notice us. We will always cope and be okay because we don't have any other choice. See beyond the bravado and offer us something to make sure we know you're taking us with you. It could be as simple as noticing that somebody isn't at church or school, online or in building, and calling them to check that everything's okay. If things are tough for us, drop your notes round with a cappuccino sachet and some cake, so that as parents we can take 5 and do church, or maybe school, together. Mostly though, just notice us." It's a great message to finish with. I hope you found this talk helpful. If you'd like to know more about the work that I'm doing in this area, then my contact details are in the information in the workbook that hopefully you've got access to, and are also on screen. Thanks for listening.